anytime somebody calls and asks, should I open a brewery? And I always tell them, plan for 2 times as much time and 2 times as much money, and then you might be right. We were wrong on how much the equipment was going to cost. We were wrong on how much the construction was going to cost. We were wrong on the 77,000 change orders that we had with the wall that fell into the street. The building wasn't measured correctly by the architects. All the windows came in the wrong size. You name it, the problem happened. It was not all rose-colored glasses for those first 2 years. What could go wrong did. And so it's really it's perseverance. It's believing in a vision and not letting the obstacles get in the way.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I'm your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I'm coming to you live not too far from where our guest joins us here in the heart of Ohio City. Brent Zimmerman is the co-founder and CEO of Saucy Brew Works, which is a Cleveland-based production brewery and brewpub with roots based in the Steelman building off 29th and Detroit Avenue, which has since spread into central Ohio and to Michigan. Over the last year, Saucy became the 4th fastest growing brand in the state of Ohio and is now of the top grossing craft breweries in Cleveland, winning Beer and Brewpub awards across the board, from Cleveland.com's Best Brewery to Ohio City's Business of the Year. Brent is an entrepreneur, beer fanatic, and has steered Saucy Brew Works from inception to where it stands today, valued at over $100 million across capital raising, branding, construction, distribution, community building, culture, product, and geographic expansion. I loved hearing about Brent's story starting up what is now a true staple in Ohio City and beyond. I hope you all enjoy my conversation with Brent Zimmerman. Having lived in Ohio City over the past few years, I remember when Saucy first opened back in 2017 or so, and just like witnessing this entire transformation of Hingetown and the whole area around Detroit Avenue, with Saucy in my mind really as the anchor institution. And it has really been awesome to see the vibrancy of the neighborhood just continue to evolve. And I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I think the entrepreneurial journey you're on here really required some prescience and foresight and vision. And so I'm excited to just kind of hear your story and how it's all transpired. So thank you for coming on, Brent.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So the Saucy journey really started for me in like 2015, probably. I was asked to be a seed investor of another brewery and did a lot of work around that. My background, I owned a long short credit hedge fund. I worked on Wall Street. I worked for a big mutual fund company, so nothing to do with the brewing industry. But I analyzed, managed, bought, sold billions and billions of dollars of risk in almost any industry you can think of around the world. And so one of my, I guess, skills is being able to analyze value, I will say. And I applied that kind of to the brewing industry and went into this, head over heels into figuring out what the brewing industry was, other than the beer I drank and what it was all about. And I kind of fell in love with it. And during that course of time, I brought Eric Anderson, my co-founder, in to look at basically the operational side of what goes on in a brewery, because I've never brewed a beer before in my life and still haven't to this day. I just drink them. And he's a biologist by trade. He opened a couple breweries. He might as well be an engineer. The guy's really a brilliant guy. And so we kind of tackled this together. I decided, I wanted to do it. I just didn't want to do it with the original partner. No offense to them. I just kind of want to do my own thing. And Eric at the time had opened another brewery and was promised a bunch of things that never came to fruition. And so we kind of had a post-mortem, and I was like, all right, what's going on with your life? We've talked about me for a month now, like what what's clicking for you? And he seemed a little downtrodden, and I got to the root of it. And he created all this, engineered it all, built it all, was the brewmaster, etc. And he just wanted ownership. And I'm like, oh, that's easy. Let's do it ourselves. I'll give you ownership. And he kind of like fell off his chair. He's like, well, you'll give me ownership? I'm like, yeah, no problem. Why wouldn't I? And so I think 5 days or less, we had an operating agreement written, and off to the races we went. To try to find the perfect location and all those kind of things while he was building what the equipment specs were, recipes, talking to hop providers for contracts, all the stuff you have to do as a brewery. I was doing kind of the real estate side of things, which I do and I always have done. Grew up in doing that. And we fell in love with the Steelman building, which at the time, if you remember, was dilapidated.
Mm-hmm.
Windows broken all over the sidewalk, syringes on the sidewalk, and I'm not kidding. It was just not like ideal at that time. But I saw its proximity to downtown Cleveland, as well as the housing stock and how old Iowa City is and all that kind of stuff. And I also knew that I could somehow affect change because of that property, as well as owning an adjacent parking lot. The building's about 14,000 square feet. It pretty well fit from a size perspective, how open it was, from a height perspective. It was doable, and it was close to the city, which we wanted. After living in Boston, New York for 6, 7, 8 years, I no longer wanted to live somewhere and have to drive all the time to come to work, and I still don't to this day. That kind of drove a lot of it. I thought that the neighborhood would really turn around. I didn't think it would happen as quickly as it did, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. We contributed our parking lot with Graham Vesey and Michael Panzica and Fred Geis and Jim Doyle combined parcels to build Church and State as well. And so that obviously helped anchor the entire neighborhood with 158 apartment units right on top of us. So it was definitely part of the vision. Eventually, it happened a lot quicker than I thought it would. But it's been a great transformation and continues to, this day, continues to grow.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible, the transformation. In those first 2 years from 2015 before opening in 2017, what was the nature of the work that you all were doing then? And I'm curious, having seen some of the assumptions you've made kind of pan out correctly, if there were ones, when you were thinking about value and risk that didn't really pan out.
Yeah, I'll take the last one first. There's tons of stuff that I was dead wrong on. And anytime somebody calls and asks, should I open a brewery? And I always tell them, plan for 2 times as much time and 2 times as much money, and then you might be right. We were wrong on how much the equipment was going to cost. We were wrong on how much the construction was going to cost. We were wrong on the 77,000 change orders that we had with the wall that fell into the street. The building wasn't measured correctly by the architects. All the windows came in the wrong size. You name it, the problem happened. It was not all rose-colored glasses for those first 2 years. What could go wrong did. And so it's really it's perseverance. It's believing in a vision and not letting the obstacles get in the way. The former question, what was I doing on a day-to-day? I still had my day job, so I was managing, with leverage, $2.5 billion of debt. Eric he was the first full-time employee, so he was on payroll, I don't know, sometime 15 or 16 with no revenue. So I was doing things like all the legal, trying to put the team together, all the real estate financing, and of course this is all, basically at the end of the day, there's a building here, but it's pretty much ground up. 95% of the building was rehabbed. Mm-hmm. A startup that we're putting in there as an anchor tenant. And so, you can imagine that whole exercise with banks, et cetera, trying to get that done. I had tons of meetings with Savista Bank and talked them into it. And so they've been great partners for us, and it's worked out really well. They took a chance. Of course, I had to sign my entire life away. Another large investor had to do the same to get it done. But you name it, we were doing it. We had weekly, Eric, my dad actually did the construction, Zimmerman Remodeling Construction. It's been around since 1950. So you can imagine the infighting he and I are having the entire project. He actually ended up firing his manager of the project, hired Eric to be his on-site manager because Eric knows all the engineering and stuff of the brewing equipment, the piping, and all that kind of stuff. So Eric's helping me get the brewery open while helping my dad get the construction done. And we're at weekly meetings, complete catastrophes at every turn. It's comical. It could be a movie almost. And I'm sure that every other startup has similar stories like this. It's just the one I lived through, so I'm telling it how it was.
I was curious just how that transpired because I'm as a consumer, a patron, if you will, of Saucy Brew Works. I really only got to see the finished product. So.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's all easy. Yeah, perfect. It was cake. No, it was the only I talked to Eric about, my son was born just around the time that we were getting open. Just before that, which other than opening this brewery is the hardest thing I've ever done is be a parent. I don't know if you have any kids or not, but I mean, it's very rewarding. Don't get me wrong, but it's hard. There's no manual, and I have two now, and they're just, they're not the same, and they're not the same as anybody else's kids. And there's not just like panacea of this is what you do. So you're starting a startup, you're trying to get this real estate venture off the ground, and then you have, a newborn that you've never dealt with before. It was interesting to say the least.
I can imagine. You have this business model that I really love. Big fan of puns, but the pub and spoke idea. Was that the vision from day one to have some distribution to what you were doing beyond the brew pubs themselves? Or how did that strategy kind of evolve? And if you could just kind of lay out how you think about pub and spoke.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually was part of the plan day one. We followed a couple of breweries basically, and in California, we really loved their model, and they kind of, they did it. So we kind of took it from them. But there's always been from day one the intention of pub production, selling into grocery, restaurants, etc. And then eventually, more pubs to sell beer to yourself. Selling beer to yourself is, 6 times more profitable than selling beer to a grocery store. But the grocery store does the volume in which it helps you pay for all the, fancy equipment, right? So it's very symbiotic. The relationship. It takes a while to pay for the production facility to make cash, actual cash on that humongous investment that you're putting in place. Not only from a equipment perspective, from human talent perspective. We've got a bunch of scientists back there. We got a bunch of former marketing and graphics people from big firms that have very respectable resumes that are not ground level people. That it costs a lot of money to kind of do what we're doing. One of the splashes that I'm sure everybody scratches their head to every day that's never met me is I can't believe that the craft beer sponsor the Cleveland Cavaliers. What the hell are they thinking? And my thinking on that was literally as it relates to pub and spoke, because it helped us get into Giant Eagle the first year we were in business. Unheard of. That doesn't happen. And, I give the Cavs a lot of credit that if it wasn't for them, year one, we would have never been in the business, the grocery business. And that's helped us a lot. So, yeah, it's an expensive partnership, but it's a good one. They really treat us well, and you go into those things thinking, man, these guys are huge, and Mr. Gilbert and all. They're like, man, they could really crush us. But that's the last thing they're thinking about. They want all their partners to succeed, which was fantastic. So, that's kind of the method to the madness. I think some people definitely view us as crazy, and we are a little bit. But we'll continue to open pubs. We're looking at tons of opportunities as we speak. It's a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, it's always been part of the design. Yeah,
and the other thing that I've noted that feels very intentional about what you're doing is this kind of community-oriented approach to just how you build out these facilities and continue to work with them over time. And yeah, I'd love to just kind of do a deeper dive on how you've thought about that approach. And as you think about geographic expansion, I know there's potentially opportunities in Detroit and Charlotte, and how you're thinking about intentionality of those and building community.
Yeah, so I was lucky. I grew up in a very small town called Bellevue, Ohio, 8,500 people. I don't think the population's changed since my dad was a kid. I was lucky that both my grandmother and my grandfather were named Citizens of the Year in Bellevue, Ohio for their philanthropy. And my largest investor, Paul Hubbard, who's actually resides in California but has a house in Lakeside that my dad built, right? You can see the inception going on here. He impressed upon us when he helped seed the company, Brent, I'm never going to get in your guys' business on a daily basis. If you ever need me for advice, whatever, I'm always here. The one thing you got to get right is culture. And he was more intentional about culture internally with the people here, because internally the culture makes a lot of difference externally to a customer, and it really has resonated with us. So we really wanted to be, we make mistakes every day. Don't get me wrong, we're not perfect. No one is, but we really intentionally wanted to be, good stewards of not only internally our people, but also the community that we're in, because it tends to, it's 1 + 1 = 4 or 5. It's not 2, and so we've seen that come back through and through. We just won Small Business of the Year award for Ohio City Inc. for all the philanthropic things we did during the pandemic when people were hurting the most. We, as an entire company, just really stepped up, whether it be the tip jar that we raised, $150,000+ for all the servers and bartenders and cooks in Cleveland, not just our own. Everybody in Cleveland signed up. There's over 1,000 people that signed up. We did penny beers for all the first responders, so penny 6-packs, a bunch of other things. We served 35,000 meals to the Cleveland Clinic. A bunch of different things that we did when it was tough. It wasn't easy street getting through this thing. There were definitely nights where I said to myself, I don't know that we're going to make it. What the hell am I going to do next? And I tried to not outwardly let anyone know that I thought that in our ranks in the company. But every single person, except one who's no longer with us, did everything in their power, internally and externally, to make sure that we made it through. And our graphic designer was making pizzas. I was filling crowlers. Our head of marketing is making pizzas and filling in. Everybody was doing anything they possibly could just to make sure that this thing worked. And for a while, even though COVID sucked, it was very rewarding. It was an awesome team building experience. I think we're better for actually going through that together and kind of seeing where everybody's stripes lie, because it was brutal for everybody, and we were not excluded from that. So as I look into other markets, I first and foremost have a real estate bent on everything. And Matt Schubeck, my COO, who actually used to work for me at my hedge fund, and I have our quote unquote proprietary algorithm that we use to decide what that is, and it is not overly sophisticated. So don't think that it is. But it generally populates where we should be growing. So we pick those locations, and then we got to find good partners. Sometimes, like our partnership in Charlotte is with GBX Group, who is right down the street here in Cleveland, and they specialize in saving historic assets through conservation easements. And some of them are just through friends of friends that are real estate owners. In the case of Detroit, obviously Mr. Gilbert owns Bedrock and he owns the Cavs, so we already had a relationship with those guys, who, by the way, treat us great as well. During that whole thing, they were just sure that listen, guys, we don't care about you making any money, right? We just want you to stay open. We want you to get open. You don't need to pay us rent, that kind of thing. So they were very helpful, forgiving, etc. So I shudder at some of the negative press some of those guys get sometimes, because they do a lot of good things. But we'll continue to do that. I believe that to go into a market, if it was 10 years ago, I could be a regional brewery and I could ship beer via distributors to any market I wanted to. The fatheads and stuff of the world when they were born back then. Now you can't do that. It's way too competitive. There's almost 9,000 breweries, so you need to have a local presence from a pub perspective in these communities. You need to be involved in the community. You have to have people that live in the community. You have to give back to the community, and you got to feel part of it so that you're actually local. Once that happens, and if that works, then after that we'll come back and we'll distribute after that with just distribution partners around the country. If it never gets to that, we're happy with putting pubs in good real estate locations in growing cities for the most part. For better or for worse, cities like Nashville, Charlotte, etc., just way easier business environment than Cleveland. So, that's super, population growth and everything else helps solve a lot of problems.
Just kind of like widening the aperture a bit and turning the lens towards the future here, building on the geographic stuff. But I know you're also kind of, thinking through product expansion beyond beer, how you kind of think about those opportunities, relative to the geographic expansion, and just kind of weighing the opportunities and direction you want to take Saucy Brew Works going forward.
Yeah, so we think of ourselves as we're trying to create a lifestyle brand. We sell beer. We've won awards for selling beer. We sell pizza. We've won awards for pizza. We're a marketing company. We're obviously out there all the time, and that's intentional. And inside of that whole complex, we're thinking about other ways to, have our clients enjoy our brand, our products. So we're constantly thinking whether it's, different categories of beer, whether it's in different locations, is there elevated food or not, whether it's completely different verticals like coffee business we started. We're thinking about that every day. We're doing it every day, and there'll be some more announcements, probably before the end of this year. One of the main drivers of what we're doing, if you, I'm sure, have noticed, through Start Engine, we're raising capital via crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Regulation CF crowdfunding. So it can be unaccredited investors as low as $100 invested. We're on a campaign right now to raise $3.9 million. I tell our marketing people, I would rather us raise $100 at a time so we have 39,000 new customers. We can ship beer to 42 states right now. We can ship swag and stuff like that, obviously, anywhere we want to. So when you get these people that have not only invested in your brand and own part of your company, which this isn't charity, they actually own part of the company. It's very different than Indiegogo or whatever. It resonates. It's powerful. You've got customers that are backing you in multiple locations. I get requests for real estate and building one in just about every state in the country now from all of our investors. I really need one of these in our neighborhood, which is great. I love getting that from them. I respond to almost every one of them that I can, and I'm happy that they're thinking about us. But it's very intentional. The capital we need, obviously, to expand, but expanding the customer base is, I think, just as important, and people that are enjoying and loving the brand.
Yeah, no, that alignment of owners and customers is a really powerful one.
Yes.
Ultimately, I think it's a really cool exercise that you're doing with crowdfunding. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was how you think about competition and differentiation in the space, especially with just this like proliferation of brewing and craft brewing specifically, and in particular here in Ohio with the history of an impact of beer, and even just here in Ohio City, a real deep kind of history. And I think it's, we're one of the top states for just brewing overall, for craft brewing, bringing in tens of billions of dollars to the state economy. How you think about differentiation? I think you've kind of touched on a few of those things.
Yeah, I think I've touched on a bunch of them, but again, for us, it starts with culture internally. I don't know very many companies. Way back in the day, I worked for KeyBank. I worked for Credit Suisse in New York. I worked for Mass Financial in Boston. So, multi-billions and trillions of dollars of companies. Never once did I have all my insurance paid 100%. Well, we do at Saucy. An employee that's full-time comes in and gets 3 weeks vacation immediately. They get added a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. If they're here 10 years, they get a 6-month sabbatical. They get free beer, free food. There's a bunch of stuff, right? So we're intentionally trying to attract talent. And sometimes we overpay a little bit versus what the market says you're supposed to pay people. But it always adds up if you're investing in them. One of the pieces we think about is education, which I don't think we've done a good enough job to this point, but we're starting to do a much better job in focusing on, just like Goldman Sachs. You can get an MBA from Goldman, and Goldman Sachs will pay for it, and they don't. You don't even have an obligation to go back and work at Goldman Sachs. They want to do better even though they're the big bad guys on Wall Street, they want to do better for the country. And a lot of times those MBAs go work for other places, and that's fine. So we kind of think about it that way a little bit. I think every brewery has their own little niche / the way they do business. I think ours is a little different than everybody else's. With the pub and spoke that you spoke about, with the basically marketing company that we run. And I think that, some of our key employees, their experience from other industries is just hard to measure. A couple former Wall Street guys, a couple of people that work with one of the biggest ad agencies in the country, somebody that worked for the Cleveland Cavaliers, which was very copacetic. That wasn't, we didn't get in trouble for that. We actually swapped. So, I'm meandering a little bit because I think a lot of it comes back to getting the people and the culture right. And of course, we have the science guys that know how to make great beer, but there's the business folks that, on the business side, everybody's paying attention to numbers, and we have goals for all of our managers and for our brewers, and, margins they need to hit, and so on and so forth. So, it's a business at the end of the day. It's not a hobby. Sometimes a person can make the best beer in the world, but if you can't run a business, it's not going to be around long. So, we pay equal attention to both sides of those things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. More at a kind of macro level, one of the trends, and I see it kind of across all the industries, but I think Jim Barksdale is the one who famously said that there's like only two ways to make money: bundling and unbundling. And I feel like specifically within the beer industry, we kind of had this proliferation of craft beer, and now maybe kind of a consolidation of those brands by the behemoths in the space. You mentioned kind of the vision of ultimately being a lifestyle brand, and how you think maybe about exit strategies or things of that nature, if that's even on the radar or compatible with the idea of executing on building out the lifestyle brand idea.
I get asked this question quite a bit. I would say like we're not building a company to sell it. I plan on operating this for a long time. The exit strategy for current investors that would like to make money or cash out and not hold on to this forever, I think will be through A, dividends, and B, buying shareholders out and stuff like that over time. If somebody writes a stupid check, am I going to not listen? No. I mean, I have fiduciary duty, but it's not something I think about on a daily basis. I actually am more on the offensive and thinking about consolidating myself rather than the other way around. I think you always talk to people in the industry and listen and stuff like that, and you'd be foolish not to, but it's not at the forefront of how we run our business every day. I don't even think about it, to be honest with you. I just think about how are we going to drive value for our employees, our investors, and our customers every day.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. What of all the initiatives that you're working on right now that you feel most excited about? And with that, what I want to get at is just like how you think about innovation in this space as this industry that is like as old as time and humans have been drinking for forever, like how you think about innovating in this space.
Well, it's funny, and this is a little bit out of my sweet spot, but we just published an article and I posted on LinkedIn, you could check out, about a yeast called Lachantia thermotolerance. And it's this yeast, it's creating fermentation without bacteria. And it's creating awesome, very mellow, sour beers. There's all kinds of yeasts everywhere we look, but not many of them make good beer. And so Eric and his team is doing a lot with a couple of scientists actually in Indiana around that. So they're doing a lot of, you'll start to, we've already had some of them out recently, then they taste beautiful. But some of those sours are so overpowering. They're hard to drink, but just to sip. These are just very, crushable really at the end of the day. So in the brewery space, that's pretty fun. I, again, have nothing to do with that other than drinking it. The innovation side, the brewers are always innovating and trying to innovate. On the liquid side of it, I think there's a lot of room for, it's almost like the construction industry. Like it's a little bit behind its time in just technical, like innovation, tech in general. And how do you apply a tech to this business, right? So we're looking at a lot of stuff as it relates to that, tech and data and, how do these big companies run themselves? How do they think about how they run their business every day? So we're trying to mimic some of the things they do. So there's a bunch of initiatives around that, just becoming more efficient, using our data more efficiently. It's a daily thing we think about. Still has a ton of room for improvement. Once you start harvesting some of that stuff at an efficient level, like it's just like crowdfunding. The folks that invested in you are tend to buy more often. Well, if your data is good, those folks that you're targeting tend to buy more often.
Right.
So a lot of things that big companies are thinking about, we are as well.
I would be remiss, I think, if we didn't actually talk about beer for a sec here as the crux of and spirit of what it is that you're actually doing. So just kind of basics here, like what is your favorite beer that you guys are putting out there?
My favorite beer is Love You Bye, which is a hazy imperial IPA. I spent 6 years in Boston and 2 years in Manhattan, and a lot of time in Vermont, New Hampshire, and everything else. And the East Coast makes amazing hazy IPAs, and so I kind of a little bit. I didn't make Eric do it. I don't make him do anything, but I'm like, God, give me this one. And now he makes really good ones. We've got a bunch of them actually right now. So that's my favorite beer. Go to. I mean, he has a bunch of them that come out that I'm like, oh man, maybe this is taking it off its perch, but they're not like in our core lineup. So I'm always reverting back to Love You Bye. It's 8%, so you got to kind of watch. If you have a few of them, you're in trouble.
Sure. But, yeah, I'm a big fan of the BF Hefe.
Yeah,
it's really good. One thing that I have noticed, and I'd love to get the inside scoop on this, is you guys have fun names. Where do those come from? What is the process for putting those together?
Those are all in Eric's maniacal, crazy brain. He literally has a notebook that he has like 180 names on. And then when it strikes him as this style fits that name, this is kind of how, and a lot of them are like lines from songs or, lines from movies and just snippets of it or whatever. There's been very few names that less than 5 that he has in there. And he protects it like it's a child. He will not let anybody encroach upon it. He shudders at anybody giving him suggestions. He makes fun of them. And it's a big joke internally. Eric has to name the beers. And, he happens to be very good at it. I'm not taking that away from him. But it's this thing internally that it's become where a new employee will start to like, well, hey, what about, and Eric will be like, you gotta be kidding me. Hasn't anybody told them? I name the beers. So I don't know. It's all him. He's a creative dude. He's a musician too. So now his list sometimes comes up with names that are not ready for market. And so there's a panel of us that if it's not ready for market, it doesn't hit the market. You kind of learn that the hard way, but people turn on you pretty quick. You can't have controversial things out there.
Yeah. There's some checks and balance in the creative process.
For sure. Which my filter is way less. I'm very lenient compared to like our graphics and marketing people. Like if it were just up to me, we'd have some crazy ass shit out there. And they both look at us like, you guys, I mean, seriously, I don't like you're 40-year-old man. Like, are you going to grow up? Well, no, probably not. So, we get our hands slapped sometimes.
Yeah. That's fun though. You guys are clearly having a good time.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, for the most part.
For the most part. I think just kind of building on that, one of the things that I think has been very cool just as a citizen here in Ohio City is the development of the lot kind of next to the brew pub. I'd love if you could just kind of expand on that story and the vision for that. And I know one of the things that you guys are doing that is maybe a little different is like thinking about space and utilization of that space in different ways than maybe how they're like typically used. Yeah.
So the Vibe Garden, as we call it, the Cleveland Vibrator Company used to make industrial-sized vibrators for stone quarries and stuff like that. They still are in business. They just moved because they had a valuable piece of land and probably needed some more space. It was born out of the pandemic because we had a very small patio, and where the hell are we going to put people? And we stare at that every day. And the Snavely's bought it from the Vibrator Company, and they put development plans on hold just because of the pandemic and everything else. And I looked at the time, it's like a graveyard. I mean, there's stuff everywhere. I called Pete up and said, hey, we want to turn this into an outdoor beer garden. We'll lease it from you. I mean, you guys aren't using it. You might as well get some cash in the door. Great idea. Okay, cool. So in the matter of 9 days, literally, myself, Eric, Shuby, there's Matt Shubeck, my dad, his contractors, we cleaned it up, leveled it out, put all the light posts and all the power and everything you can imagine it's over there, and had it up and running in 9 days. It cost $100,000 to do, which obviously in an environment where you're conserving cash because of COVID isn't comfortable. I could have been wrong about it, but it's doing extremely well. We don't own it. The Snavely still own it. Could we own it someday? I don't know, maybe. I hope. I would love to have something like that forever. But we'll see. Until then, we'll just keep leasing it from them on a year-to-year basis until they're either ready to develop it or sell it. But the whole thought process was A, you're outside, B, the tables were at least 10 foot apart, C, we drew an architectural drawing so that legally they were 10 feet apart and submitted that to the city. And D, we launched an app. And so you wouldn't have to, congregate with a bunch of people. You could sit at your table with your group and you order your food off and beers off the app and it would get delivered to your table. The app was off the shelf, didn't cost us much. It's clunky, but it does what it needs to do. To do what I really want to do is, $500 to $1 million, which we're not going to spend on an app. So it does what it needs to do, and it gets food to where it needs to go. People still use it. People still download it. I think they use it a little less now because they're not afraid of being around people. But it was a huge benefit and buffer for us, during the pandemic to be able to have, sometimes 48 tables full of people outside.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it was quite a valuable option for y'all to have rolled out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to kind of just build on the Cleveland focus for a moment. One of the things we do on the show is we're pulling together a collage, not necessarily of people's favorite things in Cleveland, but of hidden gems and things that other people may not know about. And so I pose this question to you.
I don't know if everybody knows about, I love the Raleigh Inn over by the Christmas Tree Story House. I don't know if everybody knows about that.
I have not been.
This is great. You haven't? Oh, it's amazing. So this is like, I think 1908 it opened or something like that. Check me on my facts, but it was a long time, more than 100 years ago. It's this little pub in the neighborhood right across the street from the Christmas Story House. And they serve great craft beer. Usually they have ours on tap, which is an added bonus. But they have great bar food. And you go in there and man, this is a great feeling place. I don't know why. And it's just because it's been there forever, I think. So that's one for sure. Another one I love that we go to lunch to all the time is Danny's Deli over on 17th, East 17th Street. Opened in 1978. And I would call it, I guess, a direct competitor to Slyman's. So the big deli sandwiches or whatever. And the owners and the people in the kitchen are like wide open to the space. And they're a bunch of characters. It's hilarious. It's like a Seinfeld episode while you're eating. I don't know if have you ever been there?
No, I haven't, but you've sold me already.
Yeah, you got to check that out. Another one I liked, a little gem, like over in the is Parkview Tavern.
Have you done that one? Parkview, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have to explain that one to you. But Raleigh Inn feels a lot like that.
But for our dozens of listeners here, what about Parkview?
It's over in the Battery Park neighborhood that's just exploded over the last decade. But it's one of the old relics that still exists on the corner over there, and it's again really good bar food, and they got great craft beer, which is you'll see as a theme for me. And we do, I can't eat at Saucy every day. As much as I love it, variety is the spice of life, right? So we have all these little gems we go to, and that's one of them. And we often see a lot of the same people at all these places and having a pint at lunch. And I don't know. It's a great feeling Cleveland place.
Yeah, it very much is.
I didn't know if you were like specific thinking restaurants and bars or not, but that's just one of my mind.
No, that it's really an eclectic collage at this point. I'm gonna have to pull it together at some point and publish it, but it's all over the place. It's actually really cool.
That's a really good idea.
Perfect. Well, Brent, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing the story of Saucy Brew Works, and as much as I have enjoyed just going over the last few years. So really appreciate it. Excited about what you guys are doing, and thank you for coming on. Yeah, man. Thank you very much. Stay in touch. Anything we can do to help with your startup, happy to do so. I don't know what that would be, but you never know. If folks have anything they want to follow up with you about, or reach out, what's the best way for them to do so? Probably LinkedIn, I would say. And then if the topic resonates, I'm almost always answer as long as it's a real person, like with a real question, and it's not just somebody trying to sell me something. And then from there, I generally go to email and text and stuff like that after that. But I think LinkedIn's probably the best first. Perfect. Well, thank you again. Thank you, Jeff. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.